Hello everyone, and welcome to the 224th episode of Analyzing Evil, featuring Yoshikage Kira from JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. When talking about a franchise as beloved and expansive as JoJo is, you're inevitably going to start asking the important questions. What's the best part, the best arc, the best hero, and most importantly, the best villain? Well, for my money, and most people's, it's Dio, as Dio is one fantastic and iconic character. But as for who's second on that list, I'd say it has to be our subject of this video, Yoshikage Kira, the man who just wanted to live a simple and tranquil life and never did a single thing wrong. Well, aside from killing all those women and cutting off their hands, of course. Jokes aside, Yoshikage is an all-around fascinating character, and in this video, we're going to discuss all the reasons why that is, by using everything we learn about him in Diamond is Unbreakable, the light novel Dead Man's Questions, and an interview Araki took part in 2004, that explains some of his thought processes behind this character's creation. But before we get into the video, be sure to check out my new gaming channel by clicking the link in the description, or the card on your screen, if that's something you're interested in. Now without further ado, let's begin. The pursuit of happiness. Above all things in this world, we all want to be happy, to achieve a state of mind and body that gives us overwhelming joy and bliss each and every day of our lives. But what the definition of true happiness is different for each and every one of us. For Yoshikage Kira, his happiness was defined by the pursuit of and living a tranquil life, a life free of stress and worry that would ensure that each day he drew breath was defined by peace and serenity. And out of all the possible ways you could define true happiness, one could argue that this is perhaps the purest. Life throws hardships unending at all of us, the outside factors that constantly try to shape and mold you, the burden of caring for yourself, your family members, and others that you love in both good and bad times. And perhaps most of all in this modern world of ours, the stress we all take on striving to achieve bigger and better things, the drive instilled within all of us to make more money, collect more objects, and garner achievements that propel us to the heights of our collective consciousness. To be ambitious is admirable, but to be content with what you have is arguably just as admirable. For to be able to look at your world and find happiness in what is, and not what is to be, is surely to know a rare peace that will carry you to the end of your days. Yoshikage Kira was one such man, and remarkably, he was a man who realized that this is what true happiness is from a young age. Yoshikage Kira was born on January 30th, 1966, in the town of Morio, to Yoshihiro Kira and an unnamed mother. As far as his childhood is concerned, we don't know too much about it, but as I said a moment ago, we do know that from a young age, Yoshikage concluded that living a tranquil life was to become his ultimate goal, and in order to make that a reality, he began to provide middling performances in school so he wouldn't stand out as being exceptional or for being an underperformer, striving to become third in every event he participated in, whilst maintaining average grades, something that he would continue to do as he grew into an adult and went on to college, and then eventually in his profession as well. My name is Yoshikage Kira. I'm 33 years old. My home is in the upscale neighborhood of Northeast Morio. I am currently a bachelor. I work for the Kameiyu Market Regional Management Office. Every day I work late and don't get home until 8 p.m. I don't smoke. I only drink occasionally. I'm always in bed by 11 p.m. so I can get a full 8 hours of sleep. Before I sleep, I drink a warm glass of milk and do my stretching exercises for about 20 minutes. That way I fall asleep quickly and soundly until morning. Every morning I wake up refreshed and stress-free, like a baby. During my yearly checkups, my doctor always says everything's perfect. If you keep worrying about winning and losing, it'll just stick in your mind and you'll be troubled. You won't be able to sleep at night if you're worrying about your enemies. My attitude towards society as a whole has made me a very content person. This is something Yoshikage says to Shigeki during their fight that sums up just how much care he puts into achieving tranquility in his life. But we're given more to draw from when Josuke and friends are investigating his house after his escape. Height, 1.75 meters. Weight, 65 kilograms. And his blood type is A. His parents were already old when he was born. His father Yoshihiro died when Yoshikage was 21. The cause of death was cancer. Looks like his mother died peacefully sometime afterwards. There's nothing suspicious in his parents' deaths, and neighbors say they were a close family. Graduated from D Academy in 1988 with a literature degree, and then moved to S-City for a job at Kameiyu's corporate office. Transferred to Moriocho branch in 1993. No criminal record, no previous marriages, didn't have any enemies, but didn't have any close friends or lovers, and was never hospitalized. What all this highlights for us is the fact that Yoshikage is an exceptionally disciplined and intelligent individual, one who was capable of recognizing exactly what he wanted as a child and then formulating a plan to ensure he would make his life into what he dreamed it could be, as there is no world where a person who comes to these conclusions and takes these steps to make their vision a reality as a child is nothing short of a genius. It should be noted, though, that it's probable that two disorders that Yoshikage seems to suffer from, obsessive-compulsive disorder, or OCD, and germophobia, could have played an equal part in forming this desire within him, alongside his genius. We know Yoshikage has OCD not just because he sticks to a rigorous routine and his house was immaculate, but because we're given a more concrete example of it when he's battling with Koichi, and he stops to fix his inside-out sock after his shoe falls off in the middle of battle, and his germophobia, while not as prominent, is all but confirmed, as when he states that he thought about getting a gym membership to increase his stamina, he refused to do so because a place like that would have sweaty unwashed guys who work out with stuff with the same hands they use to masturbate. So it could very well be that this child who was predisposed to seeking out an orderly and clean life derived his desire for a tranquil life from these aspects of his person. It's also possible that the relatively mundane existence he was exposed to as a child pushed him towards living a mundane existence himself, as the fact that Yoshikage kept several relics from his childhood in his home, such as pictures of himself and his family, indicates to me that he enjoyed his childhood and looks back on it fondly, which could mean that all his endeavors to make his life peaceful is but a continuation of the same peace he enjoyed when he was younger. But there's still one more aspect of his childhood that could have caused Yoshikage to formulate this goal for himself: the pressures of the outside world. While his home life was mundane, the outside world is decidedly not, and it could be that once Yoshikage entered school and was exposed to some of the chaos that occurs there, his desire to make his life permanently like the one he enjoyed at home could have become fully realized after this exposure, an idea which is potentially supported by something we're going to be discussing a bit later on that influenced this character's design: the song Under Pressure by David Bowie and Queen. Pressure, pushing down on me, pressing down on you, no man asks for. Under pressure, that burns a building down, splits a family in two, puts people on streets. It's the terror of knowing what this world is about, watching some good friends screaming, "Let me out." Unfortunately though, whatever Yoshikage may have made himself into with this grand plan of his was ruined by a condition that, for better or for worse, has become a staple for villains like him: antisocial personality disorder, a condition that often manifests within a person due to various factors surrounding their upbringing, typically of an abusive or traumatic nature. However, aside from the knowledge that Yoshikage has harbored his dream of living a tranquil life since he was very young, our knowledge of what his childhood was like is minimal. We do know that his father doted on his son and fostered a deep love for him, but other than that, we aren't really given much to go off of. However, the fact that we know little of his childhood was intentional on Araki's part. In the interview I mentioned in the introduction, Araki explains why he chose to do this, and he also gives us a few more tidbits of detail that we can factor into Yoshikage's character. Do you remember that scene where you see a picture of Kira's family? I put a lot of thought into drawing that. It's not a fun-looking family, but it also looks sort of peaceful, and that's creepy. The father and mother appear close to each other, but also distant. They probably haven't ever really had a major fight either. When you read about a serial killer's life, you feel chills when you come across a picture of them as a child. I wanted to imbue that picture with a bit of that feeling. Now, Kira's father, he was a strange person. Not quite a criminal, but considered odd. He probably knew his son was a murderer and went ahead hiding his crimes. Of course, Kira's father went to Egypt and obtained the bow and arrow from Enya to protect his son. Right around then, Dio was looking for allies around the world, and Kira's father was one of those accepted as having potential by him. The same for Okuyasu's father. People who had been scouted by Dio were all around the world, and even among them, Kira's father and Okuyasu's father may have had extra attention paid to them, as they were in Japan, along with Jotaro. For the mother, I haven't drawn anything about her at all, but I think she may have done a sort of abusive coddling towards Kira. Even now, I wonder if I should have drawn out Kira's relationship with his parents in more depth, but I had to cut it out with much reluctance. Or maybe I should say that I didn't have the courage to draw that out. Like I said before, I didn't want to detail Kira's past too much. I didn't want the readers to look at Kira and his father and think, these are actually very sad characters. I drew out Kira's mental state when killing, but if I started delving into the fundamental reason why he kills, Kira becomes a sort of sympathetic character. If you start sympathizing with Kira, that's not really appropriate for a shonen manga. I didn't want readers to feel sympathy. That may be the hardest thing about drawing out Kira. So a desire to leave Yoshikage as unsympathetic as possible was what influenced Araki to make his backstory vague. And while that does indeed leave us less to sympathize with, it unfortunately doesn't aid us too well in discerning what may have been the deciding factor in Yoshikage's development of ASPD. Now obviously it's not necessary for a psychopathic character to have a fleshed out backstory for them to be an effective villain. I mean, look at Anton Chigurh for example, and Yoshikage is no different. However, Araki stating in that interview that his mother may have given him abusive coddling, as well as the description of his family being close, yet distant, potentially answers why Yoshikage became who he is. And it's not because he experienced something overtly traumatic that caused him to develop this disorder, but because he didn't experience much at all. A lack of empathy is one of the hallmarks of ASPD. And while abuse and trauma are the most common instigators of this disorder, as I said earlier, a lack of something in one's youth can also cause the symptoms of this disorder. Perhaps Yoshikage's home life was defined by blandness, with his parents being there, but never much involved in their son's life, nor in their own marriage. And with a mother who may have coddled him to the point that he was incredibly sheltered, it would make sense that his childhood was defined by boredom, the mundane, and ultimately, a lack of real human connection that caused him to disassociate from what it truly means to be human. Something else to consider could be the fact that Yoshikage's parents were already old when he was born. And while having children at an advanced age doesn't guarantee anything, studies have shown that as our bodies age, so too do the parts of us that are responsible for creating children. And as those parts age, the probability of abnormal genetic conditions manifesting in newborns increases significantly. So it is possible that the various disorders that Yoshikage suffers from were partly caused by the advanced age of his parents at the time of his conception, something that could be supported by some of the lyrics of a song that one of his abilities is named after, Sheer Heart Attack by Queen, with the "It was the DNA that made me this way" lines, potentially pointing towards this conclusion. But I'm not too confident about this, so if anyone with more expertise in this area would like to chime in down below, please do so. Now the thing is, millions of people suffer from ASPD, and these millions of people are not all bloodthirsty serial killers, and it was never a guarantee that Yoshikage was going to become one either. But 4 particular aspects of Yoshikage's story ensured he would. The first is that distinct lack of humanity in the Kira household that surely caused Yoshikage to develop a distinct lack of empathy within himself. But even that did not guarantee his evolution into a killer. No, it was his sexual awakening, his first impulsive act of murder, and his father's enablement of his son's murderous behavior. Yoshikage's drive to make his life a tranquil one in his youth is one of the most defining aspects of his character. But second to that is his obsession, which has made him into the villain we know him as. His fetishization of women's hands that was brought on by his exposure to the Mona Lisa in her hands when he saw her painting in an art book when he was younger. Though it may not have been his first time getting one, Yoshikage explains that when he saw these hands, he got an erection. And considering how obsessed he became with hands following this moment, I'd argue that it very well could have been his first one. A standout moment that would permanently alter the course of his life going forward. Even here though, there was no guarantee that Yoshikage was going to become the killer he was. But with 2 distant parents and a lack of connection with others, there was no one to speak to about this strange new feeling, nor anyone to explain to him that having such a fixation isn't wrong, but it is a fantasy that must be played out with a consenting partner during consensual sexual activity. But because Yoshikage had such a lack of human connection in his life, he was incapable of fleshing out his sexuality in a healthy way, and because he didn't have the capacity to empathize with others, this resulted in his first string of murders, the murders of Reimi Sugimoto and her family, being derived not just from his obsession, but the notion that he was either unable to figure out how to have a normal relationship with a woman who would indulge his fetish, or because he never wanted to go that route in the first place, and simply didn't care about the lives of others, which would make sense considering inviting another person into your life invites chaos, and that would have ruined his tranquility. So seeing women as nothing more than vessels for the hands he so fetishized, Yoshikage impulsively chose to murder a beautiful young girl whose hands he just had to have. But even here, after his first murder, there was still no guarantee that he would continue murdering others. And the best evidence we have for this is the fact that his father became aware of his son's status as a serial killer not long after he took up the mantle. Awareness that could have allowed Yoshihiro to attempt to help his son control himself, or even turn him in if he felt so inclined. However, Yoshihiro proves himself to be fiercely dedicated to his son in all ways, and rather than trying to help him or bring him to justice so others wouldn't have to suffer his son's wrath, he chose to aid him in covering up his crimes, to the point that he even traveled to Egypt to obtain a stand-granting bow and arrow from Enya, so his son would gain a power capable of assisting him in his deadly endeavors. Now, for a parent to be dedicated to their child in this way might seem far-fetched, but in reality, a lot of parents are willing to do horrible things to protect their children, including aiding them in covering up their crimes. So it makes sense that Yoshihiro adopted this attitude after learning of his son's crimes. But it still stands that he alone was capable of stopping his son if he wished to. And because he didn't, Yoshihiro can be credited as the final influence on his son's development into a fully fledged serial killer. A killer who would go on to claim the lives of 48 women so he might take his liberties with their hands to fulfill his sexual desires. For me, it's not really about winning or losing. I just want to survive. It's just that it's in my nature to kill. Now, as a fictional serial killer, Yoshikage shares a lot of similarities with real-world serial killers. But there's one in particular that he's most alike, and that's Ted Bundy. Despite their similarities though, I couldn't find anything confirming that Araki was inspired by Ted Bundy's life when creating Yoshikage's character. However, I would argue that it would be quite the extraordinary coincidence if he didn't, as they are very similar in many ways. And as we continue talking about the various components of his character, I'll be highlighting these similarities for you. We've already talked about some of his traits, so it would make sense to continue doing so, but I think that it's best that we start talking about his appearance now, and our discussion of his appearance is going to involve someone all of you should be familiar with, David Bowie. In this story, Yoshikage dresses almost exclusively in a purple suit with a green pinstripe dress shirt, brown dress shoes, and a few different types of ties, with his most striking one being a black tie that features several laughing horn skulls. His facial features are sharp and angular, and his blonde hair is always worn combed back with a few strands of hair sticking out over his forehead. And when he takes on Kosaku Kawajiri's identity, his hair changes, but his features and dress remain relatively the same. Now, what does any of this have to do with David Bowie? Well, his appearance, especially in his original body, was modeled after David Bowie, specifically David Bowie as he appeared during the Thin White Duke era of his career as far as his hair goes, but more specific than that, as he appeared during the performance of the song Under Pressure in 1992, as you can see here, with the suit Bowie was wearing on stage being almost an exact match to Yoshikage's, except the colors are reversed. Now obviously Yoshikage being modeled after David Bowie makes sense, because, well, Araki has stated that that's the case. But the fact that his dress is modeled after this specific performance has a much deeper connection to another primary influence for Yoshikage's character, the band Queen. We've already talked about this a bit, but as most of you will be aware, many stands and their abilities are named after songs, and Yoshikage's are no different. Yoshikage's stand is called Killer Queen, with his stand's abilities being Sheer Heart Attack and Another One Bites the Dust, all of which are Queen songs. And as I said a moment ago, David Bowie was performing the song Under Pressure when he wore that suit, and the song Under Pressure is a song that was written and performed by both Queen and David Bowie, so having Yoshikage's appearance be a mirror of Bowie's during this performance is all too perfect. Now, noting what inspired Yoshikage's appearance isn't really pertinent when discussing the evil of his character, but it is a bit of a fun fact that allows us to segue into the notion that Yoshikage is an incredibly handsome man, and while the attention his beauty brings him from women damages his pursuit of a tranquil life in a few ways, it actually aids him in continuing to maintain it, as well as in his murderous endeavors. Human beings are drawn to beauty, and fortunately for beautiful people who seek to do harm to others, we're naturally more trusting of people who we perceive to be beautiful. So though Yoshikage tries to fly under the radar, and his beauty draws attention to him, when acting the part of the mundane man who wouldn't hurt a fly, his appearance undoubtedly aided him in lulling people further into trusting that this handsome man who keeps to himself is just a harmless antisocial recluse. Though we don't know the ways in which Yoshikage managed to lure in and murder all his victims, similarly to the notion that his appearance causes those around him to instinctively trust him and let their guard down around him, if he was in the habit of charming women to lure them into his clutches, then his appearance would have no doubt made it all the more easier to do so. For again, we are unfortunately naturally trusting of beautiful people, and thus much more susceptible to their charms. This is one of the ways in which Yoshikage is similar to Ted Bundy, for Ted was also considered to be quite the handsome man, one that people viewed as being an all-around American and stand-up citizen who also wouldn't hurt a fly. And one of the more prominent methods he used to kidnap and murder his victims was to play a part, whether that be the injured student needing aid taking his books to his car, or the police officer who needs urgent assistance. And because he was handsome and charming, more often than not, the women he targeted would follow him to his car, where he would then knock them unconscious and cart them off to a secluded location to have his way with them before ultimately murdering them. Tactics and strategies that were aided greatly by his monstrous intelligence and devilish cunning, which are also defining aspects of Yoshikage's character. Both men targeted young and beautiful women, but it should be noted that Yoshikage may have also introduced another component into his MO, his desire to murder women with beautiful features, but ugly hearts, as there is a moment where he spies a catty woman that he states he's going to purify through murdering her. However, we have no way of knowing whether or not every woman he murdered had a so-called ugly heart, like this woman did. Something else both of them practiced was the sadistic way they would break down their victims mentally, as Ted was known to mock his victims and torture their minds as well as their bodies. And while we aren't given too many examples of Yoshikage's sadism in action, there are two moments that stand out in particular. When he's fighting with Koichi, he asks him if he has a tissue before punching him in the face, and when he's beating on him, he chides him by asking him if he's really a man when he's crying out in pain. The second, which is one of the more gruesome moments in this arc, is when he follows a woman and her boyfriend home in his Kosaku persona and chooses to murder the both of them. But after murdering the boyfriend first, he forces this woman to cut his fingernails while chastising her, and afterwards, he rips off her slain boyfriend's ears and places them onto hers as the new earring she talked of desiring to her boyfriend on the train. A sick example of just how gruesome the mind of a man like Yoshikage is. Another similarity the two share is what they do with the bodies of the women they kill after they're gone. While Ted Bundy was more animalistic in that he assaulted the women he targeted before killing them and practiced necrophilia with their entire bodies, he was also a fan of doing things like taking a severed head home and giving them a makeover, things that he would do until the smell of the decaying corpses and body parts became too much for him to bear. While Yoshikage likely practiced necrophilia with these hands, he doesn't just use the hands he takes to get himself off, but carries them around with him to various public places, taking them on dates and shopping sprees to glam them up with jewelry. And importantly, we're given a panel where Yoshikage comments on how the hand he's currently handling is beginning to smell, and so he sprays it with some sort of freshener, which to me seems to be a clear connection to Bundy. Lastly though, we have the idea that Yoshikage is a chameleon of sorts, a man who is capable of blending into the background, and one who changes his appearance to facilitate his getaway, following his loss to Josuke and friends. And while this aspect of his character is similar to David Bowie, in that Bowie was famous for creating various characters to play while he was on stage, this also seems to be a nod to Ted Bundy as well, as even with the slightest changes in clothing, hairstyles, or facial hair, Bundy had the uncanny ability to appear to be a completely different person, something that many people who encountered him were astonished to witness. Now, if it wasn't clear enough already, Yoshikage Kira was an evil man, one whose disconnect from humanity caused him to become this hand-obsessed murderer, whose desire to kill others served as the greatest contradiction in his quest to pursue a tranquil life. But as long as his career as a serial killer was, 15 years in fact, Yoshikage was ultimately doomed to fail. And the reason why that is because of a few clashing aspects of his persona. In all his 15 years as a serial killer, he'd never left behind a single trace after killing a woman, a feat that can be attributed to Killer Queen's ability to completely erase organic matter. So it stands to reason that if he had been allowed to continue killing, he likely would have enjoyed another 15 years doing so. But despite his carefulness when disposing of evidence, one of the more interesting aspects of his personality is the fact that he's all at once extremely intelligent and capable of rational thought, superstitious, grossly overconfident when it comes to his own capabilities, and so stuck on the idea that he must live a tranquil life that he goes against his better judgment to maintain it. And it's these conflicting aspects of his person that would ultimately lead to his downfall. This downfall was certainly accelerated by the fact that Koichi and Rohan had been placed onto his trail by the ghost of Reimi. But even if that didn't happen, he was bound to encounter similar difficulties in the future. For as careful as one can be when murdering others, eventually, most killers slip up in some way and are apprehended or eliminated due to said slip-up. Yoshikage, despite his intelligence, relied on the idea that he was a lucky man, a man who by virtue of his friendly demeanor and bold drive was destined to be happy. He used his bizarre obsession with cataloging the growth of his nails to determine the most fortunate time to kill women, and he took risks when battling with Josuke and friends that he might not have otherwise, because he considered himself to be lucky, which runs counter to his otherwise typically structured and rational ways of approaching all aspects of his life. Didn't I say that luck has sided with me? It is because it provides us with life that we call it providence. What a wonderful word. Something Yoshikage states during the final battle of his life that sums up nicely his dependence on luck to bring him to victory. However, it should also be noted that Yoshikage had considerable determination when it came to achieving what he wanted to achieve, which is exemplified by these lines that he says during the same fight. But there's one thing I must not forget right now, the lessons from my past, that it's exactly at awful moments like these, at the darkest hours of my life, that is when an opportunity comes to me, when I've got my back to the wall. Just calmly deal with the situation and find an opportunity to take advantage of. This is always how Yoshikage Kira's life works out. I have never faced any hardship that I couldn't overcome, not once in my life. Despite this, the idea that he's a lucky man, and also one who has an unmatched set of skills, caused Yoshikage to develop a massive ego that manifested most notably in his arrogance in the face of his enemies. But he also shows himself to be a man who is capable of recognizing when he's been bested, and who can commend his foes. For when he's fighting with Koichi, he admits that the unbearable public humiliation he caused him granted Koichi a psychological victory. And he also states that he respects Koichi for being a worthy adversary, even if he may have made him cry when he managed to discover his name. And furthermore, as an intelligent man, he was capable of recognizing this fault within himself. And he even acknowledges this for us during the aforementioned final battle. Misconceptions are the most terrifying things in the world, and the consequences are even worse if you're overly confident that your abilities and talents are superior. Unfortunately for him, this realization came a bit too late, and another realization he had during this fight also came too late. The fact that he wouldn't even have been in that situation if he had just killed Josuke and his friends right after Shigechi had taken the sandwich bag with a hand in it. I turned myself into Kosaku Kawajiri, not because I was fleeing from you. If I had wanted to get rid of you all, I could have killed you at any time. I didn't, simply because I don't have a taste for battle. I dislike combat because it runs counter to the tranquil life that I desire. Winning a single battle is simple, but stress builds up in anticipation for the following battle. It is a foolish act. There is no action more pointless than fighting with others. That was the only reason I didn't get you out of the picture. Right now, you three are the only ones disturbing my tranquility. Those who know my identity are the only ones I have no choice but to fight. But even though this is true, there's something else that held Yoshikage back from victory. The fact that he was so set in his ways that he refused to leave Morio when he had the chance. After he was defeated the first time, he went to the Cinderella beauty parlor and changed his features to that of a man named Kosaku Kawajiri. And after taking on this persona, he essentially continued to live his life as he always had, with a few minor tweaks made to keep his cover from being blown, of course. Something that he could only manage for so long before his new son caught on to his act and began making efforts to reveal the truth of his father's new strange behavior, which Hayato eventually managed to do once Yoshikage proved to be incapable of keeping his murderous impulses in check. However, after adopting this new persona, he was more than capable of leaving town and starting life anew, and the fact that he didn't only supports the notion that the detrimental and conflicting aspects of his personality ultimately caused him to exercise poor judgment during this ordeal, which only assured his downfall. However, because he did choose to stay in Morio and live with the Kawajiri family, we're treated to something interesting. Yoshikage's first instance of prolonged exposure to real humanity. When Yoshikage is dealing with Stray Cat, a cat that had been gifted a stand by his father, he endeavors to save the life of his new pseudo-wife Shinobu, something that deeply disturbs Yoshikage. He rationalized that the only reason he was concerned for her well-being was because if she got hurt, it would mean that Jotaro could possibly have an easier time finding him. While this could be true, it is interesting to note that this could have been an indicator that his time with the Kawajiris was softening Yoshikage's character, which allowed him to empathize with others for the first time in his life. Even if that's true though, it didn't matter much in the end, for Yoshikage could not shake the idea that a man as perfect as he was, who just wanted to live a tranquil life, needed to change in even the slightest of ways, and clinging to the man he had made himself into led to a rather comparatively mundane death via accident for a man who had unleashed barbaric horrors upon so many people. And at this end, what is there to say about the insidious serial killer that was Yoshikage Kira? He was a gifted child born to elderly parents that simultaneously coddled him and kept their distance from him. A man whose possible genetic abnormalities and the circumstances of his rearing molded him into a person who above all else wanted to live a tranquil and peaceful life. Despite this, he would go on to develop a taste for women's hands, and with a lack of empathy instilled within him due to the aforementioned circumstances, he evolved into a killer that was equal parts bizarre and grotesque, a man with sick fantasies who attempted to play out those fantasies, whilst paradoxically striving to make his life as serene as possible as he brought untold terror to the lives of so many others. He was arrogant, cruel, sadistic, self-righteous, deranged, and despicable, a man who would give the most notorious serial killers of our world a run for their money. And true to how Araki wished this character to be perceived, there is little to sympathize with here. Aside from his desire to live a tranquil life, there was nothing to admire about Yoshikage Kira, and there was precious little humanity within him to find common ground with. But perhaps this is a large part of what makes his character so fascinating. A man with such an inoffensive philosophy that proves himself to be possibly one of the most abhorrent killers in all of fiction. A person who more so deserves to be labeled a beast than as a human being. A beast who was granted a death that was far better than he deserved. Despite the nature of his passing though, we can find solace in the fact that in the afterlife, Yoshikage was granted an existence that was the exact opposite of what he had strived to achieve while living. After being taken away by the ghostly hands inhabiting the alley where Reimi resided, in the story Dead Man's Questions, we find that Yoshikage has become a detective of sorts, one that only remembers his name and has no idea who he was before his passing. In his capacity as this detective, he's tasked with going from place to place to deal with criminals much like the one he was when he was living, or at the end of this story, with dealing with a ghostly anomaly that has been causing the deaths of multiple people. While this story does end on a cliffhanger, it's more than enough to know that Yoshikage neither went to heaven nor hell, but was instead granted a limbo-like existence that left him restless and unsure of himself, forever doomed to wander in search of a man he'll never be again, and to live out an eternity that is anything but tranquil. But as fascinating as all the various components that went into making this character who he is are though, when it comes down to it, after all we've discussed and learned, there is only one way to view Yoshikage Kira: as a monster. A man who none should mourn and all should rue, as a villain who only brought harm to dozens of lives, a man who would have only continued to do so if he had lived. And for everything that he was, Yoshikage Kira will forever remain a dark stain upon this world that was nothing short of pure evil. Thank you all for tuning in to this episode of Analyzing Evil, and I hope you've enjoyed. What are your thoughts on Yoshikage? Did I miss anything? And leave a suggestion for a villain you'd like to see featured while you're at it. If you like this video, hit that thumbs up button, and make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. A big thank you to all of my subscribers, my patrons, my members, anyone who's decided to honor me with a super thank, and especially Elijah Kai VA, our Dark Lord channel member. And a most vile thank you to those whose names you're seeing on screen now. Join the channel's Discord server and subreddit to interact with myself and the community, and follow me on the social media platforms listed below to keep up with the channel. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll be seeing you soon.